I am New York.
Yes, I'm New York.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
Welcome to Diverse City, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Zyphus LeBron. This month, we're here in Harlem. The storied section of Upper Manhattan has two very distinct identities. The East Side, or El Barrio, was once very Italian and Jewish, but after World War II became a magnet for Puerto Ricans and other Latinos. Then, there's West Harlem, home to iconic schools like Columbia University and the Harvard on the Hill City College, where we are today. Harlem was once considered the mecca of jazz and blues and became known as the epicenter of African-American culture in the 1920s. Historically, the area has been synonymous with black urban America, but today the black population is declining as a wave of gentrification has displaced and displeased some longtime residents. On this episode, African immigrants priced out of a neighborhood they helped revitalize. Gay and lesbian identity left out of the narrative about the Harlem Renaissance, and stirring up conversation and confections at a new uptown sweet spot. Those stories and more as we explore Harlem. In the early 1980s, Senegalese immigrants began to carve out a living in Harlem. Since then, the number of Senegalese and other French-speaking West Africans has grown to 100,000. Now, they find themselves economically unwelcomed in the neighborhood whose rebirth they helped usher in. They're moving to the Bronx and Newark, New Jersey to find affordable housing as Harlem flourishes beyond their means. Gary Pierre sat down with a pioneering Senegalese immigrant to learn more about his community and its contributions to the larger Harlem community.
I came to Harlem to tell the inspiring story of the Senegalese and French West African immigrants who have played a significant role in Harlem's rebirth. Instead, in an ironic twist of fate, that story no longer exists. I found a group of people feeling under siege who are being priced out of the community they helped revitalize. Undeterred by the blight, broken windows, and boarded buildings that was Harlem in the 1980s, the Africans opened restaurants, hair salons, and boutiques, and went about carving out a piece of their American dream. I'm joined by Mamadou Niang, a journalist who coined the term Little Senegal, to talk about the plight of French West Africans in Harlem. We head up to Bao Bao restaurant on 116th Street, where we feasted on chebogen, the Senegalese national dish of rice, fish, and vegetable. We washed it down with another Senegalese favorite, bissap juice.
I have a totally personal trajectory. I came to the United States as a cultural explorer. I was struggling myself with the remnants of French colonialism, and I was looking for a place where I couldn't find any French at all, so I came to America. America was in my heart, but Harlem was definitely my destination.
What did you find in Harlem?
What I found in Harlem was an exciting time. It was very difficult because it was a largely segregated community, and I felt alienated because of my Africanness. So when I came back in '82, and I realized now there is a new migration from West Africa, largely from Senegal first. So I started seeing them settling in Harlem, not by the African Americans who I was actually, was going to see in the United States. So the interesting thing is about when you look at this street where we're sitting right now, 116th Street, in the mid-'80s, this was a drug corridor.
No man's land.
This was a no man's land. This was a place that was very difficult to traverse. I mean, walking from Morningside to Malcolm X Avenue, I mean, you're really, walking into a minefield if you're not very, very careful. And 2-3 years later, you start seeing first the Senegalese, and then the Malians, and then the Ivorians, cleaning up the street and making it what it looks like today. The contribution of the Senegalese and the larger West African community is absolutely interesting. And now we're living a different time. And we've talked about the stories of the mosque who disappeared, the restaurant that closed, the businesses that are no longer here, and the Senegalese who are actually, there is a new exodus. They're going to Newark, New Jersey. They're going to the Bronx. So it's a new shift. It's a new paradigm. And some call it here actually the new black removal program of the 21st century. But it is definitely a massive displacement of people of color. The reason why it will still remain the black Mecca and the black center of the United States, primarily it is because this is where you find the second largest public housing magma in the United States after Queensbridge. And African Americans and the community will tell you that we are going to be here maybe because of public housing. Public housing is going to save us.
This is a community to me that made an impact unknown to everyone, and now it's in a decline, and nobody may even know that they were pioneers in this latest renaissance of Harlem.
It is part of the larger Harlem community. You can look at the West Africans, but you also have to realize that the economic infrastructure was absent when they started actually building their businesses and creating this vibrant cultural and social life that we know here. That probably would be much more, much smaller, African American community. So the displacement is touching at every corner of this society here.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Gary Pierre.
Another unheralded community was central to the cultural vitality of Harlem nearly 100 years ago. Gay men and lesbians were influential players in the Harlem Renaissance. One leading light of the movement was Alain Locke. Locke was a writer and philosopher who once taught here at City College. Dr. Jeffrey C. Stewart, a professor of Black Studies at UC Santa Barbara, recently wrote a book about Locke that's just won the National Book Award for nonfiction. We spoke to Dr. Stewart about the book's success, Locke's life, and why he and other luminaries stood out but never came out during that transformative time.
Locke's upbringing was very important to him conceiving of the new Negro. So there was a 19th century Black bourgeoisie that existed that largely predicated its existence on what I would call self-improvement. The idea that if you improved yourselves, you took on culture, you modeled yourself on Victorian values and mores, that you would have a standard of living that would essentially garner white support. Locke modeled his identity early on in this. Unfortunately, what I think he began to realize, particularly when he went to Oxford in 1907 as the Rhodes Scholar, and was excluded from the events there that were typically available to Americans, and certainly should have been available to him, being one of the most sophisticated Rhodes Scholars in 1907, was that was not enough. And that's why he liked about Harlem, you see, because in Harlem, people could go about their business for days and not even think about or encounter white people. And so there was a freedom in that, and he wanted that freedom to be expressed in the art. I think it's obviously clear now that the Harlem Renaissance was as much a contribution to what you might call Black history in America as it is to queer history in America. Because many of the people, Locke himself was gay, Countee Cullen, who was the most celebrated artist, poet of the time, was gay. Langston Hughes was certainly queer in some sense. So one of the things that I, definitely became aware of is in studying Locke, he carried on a sort of subterranean life as a gay Black man, even though it was generally an open secret that he was gay. And so he was very much concerned and aware of that. So he was in the closet, and yet he refused to do many of the things that gay people at that time did. He refused to get married. He refused to behave as if he's heterosexual. So I think that one of the things I began to realize is, why is it that he's never really involved that much with the NAACP, for example? I think at that time, the NAACP was very much a kind of middle class, heteronormative, or organization, everyone has to be married and they have to be middle class and they have to be educated and they have to do certain kinds of things. So the Harlem Renaissance became a space for those who didn't want to do that, who couldn't and didn't want to live up that kind of standard. And that led to conflict because they would write poetry, not so much openly gay poetry. Richard Bruce or Bruce Nugent probably came the closest of anyone to doing that at the time. But nevertheless, they were punished for this. A lot of the criticism that you see within the Harlem Renaissance of the Harlem Renaissance writers largely comes out of an attack on the queer nature or queer subtext or queer urtext of their literature, their short stories, their poetry. So one of the challenges, I think, in looking at the Harlem Renaissance is to see, in one sense, how much of a step forward it is, and at the same time, how much it's still caught in the kinds of notions of Blackness that essentially can be very cruel and very punishing to creative people whose sexuality perhaps is not even yet fixed yet or determined. The National Book Award wasn't something that was kind of on my radar. I think that when I won, I felt like, okay, this is kind of a validation of two things. One, all of the hard work and long years that I put into this, but then I think I was rewarded for that kind of persistence and patience. But I also think it was validation for Locke's life. To me, he was a person who was unclaimed, both in the Black studies establishment because of his queerness, I think, to a certain extent, also because of the focus often on politics and sociology in Black studies and not so much on aesthetics. I also think it's important that a Black man's life was validated by this. Still, today, we still have this sense of who is important and who is marginal. But I think it was a step for expanding the tent of inclusion to make it a little broader, a little more capacious, a little more welcoming for those people who are often considered the outsiders in American culture.
Award-winning producer, playwright, and founder of the Mama Foundation, Vy Higginson, has more than a century of family history in Harlem. She's been one of the community leaders who's presented, preserved, and promoted African-American culture in Harlem through music and performing arts. Here she is telling us about her work in her own words.
The Mama Foundation is really an outgrowth of Mama, I Wanna Sing. And of course, Mama, I Wanna Sing has now become the longest running Black off-Broadway theater musical in the history of American theater. We were the forerunners of this phase of African American theater by identifying an audience who wanted to see a story about who they are and where they came from. Nobody thought it was worthy. We were the largest employers of Black entertainment talent 52 weeks a year than any other company in America. And so we had employees both at the Heckscher Theater and we had employees on the road. And then we went to Europe. We went to places like Germany and Switzerland and Istanbul, Turkey and Greece and throughout southern Italy with a story about Harlem and a story about a family. Family, faith, love, and music was the theme of our show. We performed the show for 8 years and we probably would still be there today. But that was interrupted. Getting thrown out of the Heckscher Theater was the worst experience in my life. When I think back on it, it was a moment of pure misunderstanding. And to this day, I don't really understand why it had to happen. Ultimately, we decided that it was they wanted the theater so bad that they were going to do whatever it took to get us out, and so we just left. And that's why we formed this foundation, because there's so few places where our musical young people have an opportunity to participate. And everyone attends this school tuition free. It's a scholarship program, an after school program. It's a place where like minds come together. It's a place where young people get more than music. They learn how to be a whole human being. We take them from amateur to professional. It puts them on the right path, on the right track. So the Gospel for Teens program, the Mama Foundation for the Arts programming allows that to happen. Here in Harlem, we recently got a Whole Foods on the corner. And one of the good things that happened is that they recognized local Harlem vendors. The Mama Foundation and I became a local Harlem vendor, which means I created a sauce that was based on living on this block for 100 years. Because after my father died, my mother had to turn the brownstone into a rooming house. And people came from all walks of life. And they would go in the kitchen, and when I came home from school, the house would be full of these smells and these herbs and this, taste, and they make enough to feed all of us. My feelings about Harlem and this living on this block 100 years have to do with that rooming house and those people who came from the South. They came from the Caribbean. They came from East India. My love of all cultures was developed from that. And I put a little bit of that in a bottle, and we call it Mama's One Sauce for All Foods at Whole Foods. And a portion of the proceeds come back to the scholarship fund. And that's part of how we have to be innovative to keep our program free. I never want to lose our history, our legacy, because it's such an important contribution. Cannot be pushed aside, put under the rug, and forgotten about.
Another woman who's trying to keep Harlem's history alive is Jessica Spaulding. She's doing it by stirring up conversations and tantalizing taste buds with her chocolate concoctions at the recently opened Harlem Chocolate Factory. I visited the boutique chocolate shop when it was a little warmer outside.
My thought was finding a way to open conversations and to inform people that there was a culture here before you got here. And that it had value, and it continues to have value.
It's clear when you meet Jessica Spaulding that she values Harlem. The longtime resident is so unabashedly proud of her neighborhood that she's created several lines of chocolate inspired by the community.
We have a line of called Sunday Soul Collection, and we make various kind of Sunday desserts, because for me, Sunday dinner in Harlem was like a big thing. We make Sunday desserts in chocolate.
Spaulding says her renditions are a means of lending some sweet to a sometimes difficult conversation about the gentrification taking place in Harlem, as well as teaching people about the community's history.
For me, using Harlem Chocolate Factory as a way to kind of bridge that gap of information, or introduce that without some of the angst that comes along with having that difficult conversation when you've moved into a neighborhood that you think that you made better, and being informed that that's not how it happened in a sweet way is an important way.
Before it became that bridge of information, their store was just a dream that seemed unattainable until Spaulding took a few business courses and a chance on her idea.
In that secondary business class, there was like a homework for the day. If you genuinely believe in your business, will you purchase your domain? And I only had like $12 in my account anyway, so I was just like, if I'm going to purchase this domain, this means I'm serious about it, right?
So serious that she put a splash page online soon after purchasing the domain name. That was 2015. Since then, the chocolatier took out a small business loan and launched her company. Now she creates most of her confections in this workspace that's in the back of her store. So you can describe to us what you're doing.
Yeah, this is, we paint the mold first. We'll backfill it with chocolate. So these are all been painted with tempered cocoa butter.
She says her love of chocolate stirred when she was a child. It was a strained love affair because her mom, who she describes as a health food nut, would allow no snacks or sugar in their house.
I started originally working with chocolate to try to con my mom into buying more chocolate for the house. And secondly, like, it just seemed so amazing. It just combined all the areas of my life. It was artistic, it was chocolate, it was science. It was just so much fun.
Spalding started learning the science and art of tempering and making chocolate when she was 9 years old. The self-taught chocolatier admits to still having a lot to learn.
I just try to encourage myself and read as much as possible and reach out to people as much as possible whenever I do have a question. Anyone who will answer. If they won't, they won't. They will. And if not, I'll continue to try to figure it out.
While she's figuring it out, she's also sharing her chocolate, her humor, and history of Harlem.
This is the old stables. This is where the horses used to come in. Yeah, so this is where you would come in to the back of the buildings to park your horse.
Finally, the African American must remake his past in order to make his future. History must restore what slavery took away. These are the words of Afro-Boricua activist and historian Arturo Alfonso Schomburg. He arrived in New York from Puerto Rico in 1891 and lived in Harlem. Judith Escalona took a walk through Schomburg's old neighborhood to find out more about his life and legacy.
This unassuming apartment building, 205 West 115th Street, was once home to a man who would come to be known as one of the fathers of Black history. His name was Arturo Alfonso Schomburg, a 17-year-old Afro-Borinqueño, as he called himself. He arrived in New York from Puerto Rico in 1891 and would play a major role in forging African-American identity.
Arturo Schomburg was a man who was born in Santurce, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, in 1874. He was a person who was told when he was in 5th grade, people of African ancestry have not really contributed very much to civil society. There's not much history we can talk to about that. He said, well, that can't be true. It can't be true. And he's only in 5th grade, he's only like 10, 11 years old.
That legend is as questionable as George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, but it points to a passion that would last a lifetime. At first, he was part of the Puerto Rican and Cuban independence movement from Spain, pursuing equity for Afro-Caribbeans and other groups. After the Spanish-American War, he turned towards the African-American struggle.
He was going to show that we, as people of color, have made significant contributions to civil society and to the world at large. And that's what set him off to begin to collect everything that he could. Photographs, prints, books, pamphlets, art, everything that he could that was by, for, or about Black people.
By the time he was done, 30 years had passed and Schomburg had collected thousands of works from the United States, Europe, and the Caribbean. Now a respected elder of the Harlem Renaissance, Schomburg hosted writers, poets, artists, and scholars where they would learn about their heritage. Among them, the young Langston Hughes, who he mentored.
I was born in 1939. Arturo Schomburg died in 1938 in Brooklyn. So I missed him by 9 months. I like to think that he knew I was coming. When I came of age and learned what he had done and what the Schomburg Center was all about, I'm saying, well, it's going to be up to me to try to carry out this legacy.
A legacy that included the creation of Black Studies courses throughout the country at a time when historically Black colleges and universities were only vocational schools teaching manual skills.
Up in 1915, He went to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and he addressed the body of people there, and he was the first one on record to call for a Black Studies program in colleges and universities. And it wasn't until 50 years later, in 1963, at the University of San Francisco in California, that a Black Studies program was actually instituted at a college.
In 1928, the New York Public Library bought his entire collection, creating the library's first collection on Black culture. Today, that archive continues to grow, and researchers worldwide visit the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, located at 135th Street and Lenox Avenue. Judith Escalona for DiverseCITY.
Thanks for coming along with us on our walk through Harlem. Join us next time when we'll journey to Sunset Park, Brooklyn, a community feeling the effects of industry in our diverse city.